Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name is Renee Lavallee Mckenna, and I'm a therapist and shamanic healer here in Manhattan. And I'm today with Dr. Chris Desitefano. He's a consciousness coach and an integrative acupuncturist and a fellow cosmonaut. And we're going to talk about levels of consciousness in challenging times, and also this idea of a right brain, left brain, or what I like to call inner masculine and feminine, or what's known in the more Eastern circles as yin and yang. So we're going to see where this conversation goes. Chris, welcome so much.
Thanks so much for having me back.
So we're living in very dynamic times, challenging for many, frightening for many, depending on where they're at, or part of our evolution, depending on your perspective and your own personal level of consciousness, I think. Would you agree?
Completely.
Yeah.
You nailed it with that. Yes.
So we met at a Levels of Consciousness conference with Fred Dodson, who's not a doctor, and have both, I think, experienced that our levels of consciousness have a lot. They are our perspective, or the glasses that we see the world through, and they're not fixed. And lots of times what we think is reality and how we perceive reality, particularly our emotional experience, or even the way that we think about things, is really based on our worldview, which is based on our level of consciousness. And we are here evolving and developing, and it's kind of an infinite, what did you say? There is no goal, there is no end point.
There is no finish line, it's only the direction. Yes. So our intent is so important.
And so talk about intent a little bit. If we think about, so we think about a lot, the biggest thing that's present right now is the war in Gaza. And lots of people are suffering about other people suffering. They're suffering about the idea of war in general, and, different religious positions and genocide and all of these really, horrific experiences that we can perpetrate on each other as humans. And what are some of the different perspectives that we can hold on that might be helpful?
Well, I don't really love diving into very specifics because right here, even with what's going on there,
Mhm.
depending on the levels of consciousness, a lot of people will get triggered.
Mhm.
And that's a really important thing in our own development for each of us. The most important thing for all of this,
Mhm.
I cannot fix what's going on in Israel and Gaza.
Right.
I can work on myself. That's reflective of my own conflict in me.
Yeah.
The way I handle it, the way I process it is reflective of my vibrational state. I'm not saying if I fix myself, the war ends,
Mhm.
but I am saying what can be worked on is yes, I am a co creator of this reality, as are the rest of us.
Mhm.
And if we want a better world, we need to start going into ourselves. We need to start finding parts of ourselves that we hold that are not true. I actually call them parasites
Mhm.
because these are energies that are not harmonic with our truth and are not serving our highest good. And they're preventing our consciousness from, it's kind of like if you have a tuning fork that has something stuck to it, it's not going to vibrate beautifully. Once that's cleared off, then we can begin to really resonate in our truth. And one of the things I find to be very, very important when looking at all these issues, and this touches upon something we talked about a little bit earlier, is the left and the right side of the brain, or what I
Mhm.
also like to call the masculine and the feminine.
Mhm.
In our culture, we've sort of pushed it aside, but it's such a beautiful energy when expressed truthfully. And as we elevate in consciousness, it's the harmony of the yin and the yang, the left and the right. It's as we bring it further into balance that we're able to continue to rise.
Mhm.
Out of balance, we will not be able to. So it's being
Mm.
able to look at something like this conflict with an open and compassionate heart, with an understanding, because I do challenge, it's great. I'll challenge people with anxiety if they claim to be religious. And I'll say, okay, is God omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent? And the answer is always yes. And I'm like, then why are you so anxious? Do you know better than the plan of the divine? And it's being able to open and to
Yeah.
trust that what's happening is ultimately beyond my ability to understand. And I can only come to it with compassion.
So
I know that's not, yes.
I have to say that I don't think it is. I mean, certainly the cosmological unfolding is beyond our ability to understand. But
Yes.
anything I desire to understand, I believe we can come into understanding of it if that's our true intention. And
Hmm.
for me, this is where levels of consciousness and also spiral dynamics, which is another system to understand the worldview, the developing worldviews of individuals and groups and countries and societies. That there is a natural developmental trajectory that is part
Yes.
of this third density of the earth plane, I like to call it. And is this the only plane? No, there are ones before it and ones after it that those are unknowable from this place for the most part. But that there is a natural thing that's happening here and it's not a design flaw. Like that's the thing that I've come to. And I think where people are afraid is actually, and this question of God really is the question. I think that for many people, God is dead. And we have come to believe that the only power that's actually available is human power. And we know how limited that is. And we're hoping to depend on ourselves or feeling like we need to fix things or straighten things out. And we've lost this trust in the brilliance of this larger system, which can be really confusing unless we take an extreme meta view on it, which is, first of all, we're all going to die. That fact, and that's not a design flaw. Death is not a tragedy. It's not a terrible thing. It's part of this system that we have birth. We live through an evolutionary process. We may procreate, we may not, but we create different things along the way. We're part of a system. And then we pass away. What happens after that has many different questions. That's another conversation. But if we really can own that and that is okay, it's part of the design, birth and death, the ending of all things, then there's, I think, much less attachment to this idea of survival. And we can see that there's an infinite and ever, as they say in Catholicism, world without end. There's a system happening. And if we look at human history, we're evolving. Slavery worldwide is illegal. It may still be practiced some places, but it's not an acceptable trade. Women have rights in most of the world. You could like beat your wife and kill her, and no one could do anything about it. No one cared, right? You could sell your children in Rome, like it did. So, and slavery existed in indigenous people, it existed in tribal people, it existed all the time. So we've evolved as a species into a much more humanitarian, caring about people, but evolution is slow, right? Like, the development from being in the ocean to being able to have wings and becoming dinosaurs, like that takes some time. So I just talked a lot. What do you think about that?
Few things. First of all, evolution is slow until it's not. Everything,
Mm,
like everything, you have your lull and then you have your pop. And we're in a pop
that's
right now.
true. That's true. It's true.
So,
Yes, there
and
are pops.
everything follows its own timeline. We're not in, we're in a pop. We can feel it. It's fascinating because we're talking about levels of consciousness, and it's so beautiful how the truth is a paradox, because lately I've been on a kick of, you just said we're all going to die, and I totally agree with that. And meanwhile, I was going up to people the other day saying, this is eternity. Thanks for joining me on the ride.
And
Because
both,
this,
that's the other thing, both are
both
true.
are true.
Both are
Yes.
true.
And to be
Yes,
able to hold both in our hearts,
yes,
that's
yes.
how we're able to move.
I
Yes.
think maybe that's the pop, Chris, is owning, right? Because my peace, and I had to make peace with death before I could do any inner work or have any trust for a power greater than myself. Because, if you're going to, like, does my trust mean everything's going to be nice? I'm always going to be happy and I'm going to live forever. If, like, God is Santa Claus or whatever, like, that isn't actually how it works. So to make peace with the impermanence of this little avatar called Renee, but that I'm actually part of this larger system, and like energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Like there is a continual flow. I'm part of that. And I think it's our
Yeah.
separation from that, which is actually the first story in the Bible. Like, how did we get separated out from Eden? Our separation, our experience of ourselves is separate. I think it's the root of all human suffering, myself.
That's, you nailed something I talk about all the time, which is, and we're going to now go where we were treading earlier, the left and right side of the brain.
Mhm.
The left side of the brain, according to the Bible, fits the definition of the devil.
Mm. The
It's
left side
separate.
being
It's
okay.
also,
So let's use masculine and feminine, because so let's define this for people.
I, please don't.
Mm.
Please don't,
Well, it's
because that
different.
will confuse it. Let
Okay,
me just
so
use left
left
side of the
side
brain.
being the intellect.
Left side being the rational,
Yes.
logical,
Okay.
the side that collapses and focuses. The right side, if you read the book, A Stroke of Insight, that book, she has a full out stroke of the left side and becomes fully immersed in the right side, which is
Mm.
nonverbal, visual, oceanic, fully connected to everything.
Yes.
The left side is reductive. I don't want to use the yin and the yang or masculine and feminine, because my feelings on them are different than the descriptions given in medical textbooks for left and right side of the brain. And I was very left brain dominant traditionally, and that contributed a lot to my depression, because it's a separateness. It's that intellectualization of reality. It's that keeping ourselves from feeling and protecting ourselves because we're separate and vulnerable.
Mm.
It's that not trusting. It's that walling off because it's an unsafe world. It's that separateness from God.
Well, it's also, though, just from a positive standpoint, it's also the planning, organizing, structure building, action oriented, manifesting in the physical world, creative part.
Exactly.
I live in Manhattan, and I can feel, really, I have so much respect for this city, and I can feel like the brilliance of the left side of the brain, really, of men, to tell you the truth, because men built the structures in the city, and it's brilliant, and it functions really well. Like, there is it's totally necessary on the physical plane, and yet, and this is, I think, really the call to evolution, is that the left side doesn't trust the right side or doesn't know the right side. And I mean, I can't not talk about masculine and feminine and institutional
Now we can, but
misogyny.
I wanted to get out the definition, like
No, I
my
think it's a,
explanation. By the way,
yeah,
the mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master.
yes,
So I completely agree with you. It is a
yes,
beautiful tool, but it does not do well when driving the car full time.
no. I mean, this is where there's a beautiful image, and I'll maybe try to link it in the show notes, of um, Sir Lancelot and Guinevere, and she's holding a sword. She's the queen holding a sword, and he's kneeling before her. And the appropriate relationship with the masculine and the
Yes.
feminine, which is that the mind serves the heart or serves the larger consciousness system, the intuitive, the all being of the wisdom of the universe, which is what the feminine has access to. Not that all feminine here is not about gender, and certainly not all women have any contact with that either, but the mind being in service, it's the horse that draws the cart.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to please allow me to self-immolate, because I'm going to go and touch the third rail right
You
now.
do it. Go.
So I believe that we're in a consciousness model of reality.
Mhm.
And so we create our video games, which as a guy, I've played
Mhm.
quite a few. Our video games are reflective of the
Yes.
consciousness that's created us.
Yes.
And we start off with obstacles. When we put obstacles in our way, and one of the obstacles we've put in our way right now, society-wise, is confusion of the masculine and feminine. When we're clear on it and when it's coming in harmony, a lot like what we just discussed with the brain, I was imbalanced in my brain,
Mhm.
and that caused disharmony. And as we also said, when the left and the right, when the masculine and the feminine are in harmony, we start to elevate through consciousness
Yes.
as we balance. And so what do we do? We call toxic masculinity. We say women should be completely equal, men should be complete everything. We're different. That's the beauty of it. We have
Mhm.
different gifts, different attributes, and we have different shortcomings. And my understanding of masculinity is, so as a man, there's a physical awareness that I am bigger and stronger than most women, just by
Mhm.
nature. And in a healthy way, that is meant as a protective and serving energy. And
Right.
women have an incredible, that feminine energy, that capacity to nurture, to hold that presence, to
To
is
birth new
just,
life.
yes,
Right.
to
No,
birth new
men
life.
build
Thank
the
you.
container and the women fill it with and make it a home. I mean, this is the,
Like,
yeah. I think
you look at a bird, and a bird has that beautiful plumage initially, so that way if predators come to the nest, that male bird can sacrifice himself to preserve the species in the family.
Mhm.
And that's what that masculine energy can do. And it's really, when applied properly, the two energies combined are so much more powerful
Well,
than
they are a
each independent.
co-creative force, right? You need, and here's the
Yes.
thing that I see. So traditionally, they've been separate and it's been expressed through men and women separate. And
Yes.
now I think where we're really being called to the evolutionary cusp is to integrate those within us. So I actually present an identified, very intellectual, very masculine in many, many ways. And I
Mhm.
rejected the quote unquote feminine because I saw it as weak. I saw it as disempowered. Wise, empowered feminine is actually not modeled very much in our culture. And it's the shadow side of misogyny, is that women have bought into staying girls, men become men, and women stay girls and want to be taken care of, and don't want to integrate the necessity of the masculine dynamic, which is that we need to be willing to die for what is important to us. We need to be willing to create structures for ourselves. We need to be willing not to have someone external do it for us, and integrating intellect and intuition, integrating emotions, integrating spirituality, integrating the what I like, the physical and the metaphysical, right? The personal and the transpersonal. Like these are what need to be integrated and married and have a baby.
Yes.
Which is our new consciousness of ourself as integrated beings.
That is so well said, because coming from the other perspective, I've had to, and not had to, I have had a journey of having to reintegrate feeling, reintegrate
Absolutely.
presence. And the Tao Te Ching says it. which is know the masculine and hold the feminine. It's about finding the balance within each of us because we are composed of both. And
Mm.
to become
Mm.
only one is to be a caricature. There is no depth. That is not authenticity. But
You
we
know,
also have, we express like a flower blooming in a particular way as well.
so really what we need to grow in trust of is the right side of the brain, is the feminine. And the
Yes.
fear that people have that we're going to kill the earth, that terrible things are going to happen, that humanity is going to die. I got bad news for you. No species lasts forever. Yes, at some point humanity will end. And that's not a tragedy. It's fine. The dinosaurs died too. It's okay. We don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore. Something new will happen. That's the piece that we don't trust. And the stuckness in this masculine or left brain. The thing I see with people is that it's actually overloaded. I have tremendous, toxic masculinity is because there actually hasn't been a strong, wise, evolved, grounded feminine to assist it. And and the masculine thinks it has to do everything. It thinks it has to figure everything out. It has to, and it knows it can't, because
Yes.
the masculine can't birth a child. The masculine can't make a flower bloom. It can, arrange the plot and plant the seeds, but the magic, the alchemy, the mystery, the energy, the flow, that is what we need to grow in trust of, individually and collectively. And we can start, like you said, we can start with that right within ourselves. We don't need to project onto other countries or suffering people in the world. Like, we can look at our own suffering. And, I know for myself as a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and I used to make myself throw up every day. And I acted out all kinds of ways, my feelings, because I didn't know how to have them and be vulnerable and open and grounded and present and trusting. I had to distract and medicate, and I tried to like crush that intuitive, now I know creative and very wise, actually, ultimately part of myself, the vulnerable part of myself. And I had to stop doing all that and try to make peace and friends with it. And ultimately, it has become that feminine side, that right brain it has become the cart that the horse needs to pull, and it's filled with jewels.
And I love that. And I'd like to expand slightly because you're one of the few people I've spoken with who really I find can connect with this. Almost every teacher out there gets, we have a tendency to want to get locked into dogma. And what I've found in my journey of consciousness is, first of all, we will keep running across the same events in life, but it doesn't mean we're not progressing. It's almost like a spiral,
It
and we're
is.
passing it at different levels
Yep.
each time with different tools to look at it. And as we grow in consciousness, and I don't like using the word grow, as our consciousness becomes more tuned to who we truly are, it shifts back and forth, masculine and feminine, in that, I'm going to use the word ascension process, or in the
Mhm.
refinement
It
process.
is an
And we'll
essential
feel it
process,
shift.
I think, in a lot of ways. People don't
Yeah.
like that
And it's
because
definitely,
hierarchy's bad, and but it is. I'm sorry, my consciousness is so much different than it was 35 years ago when I was like snorting coke and chugging vodka every day.
yes,
Yeah,
slightly
different.
ascended.
Yeah.
Although you might have thought you were God back then for a brief
No,
moment.
no, no. I thought I was
Okay.
Satan, actually. I thought I was bad. Yeah, I really did. Yeah. Anyway.
That's a fascinating one too. I confronted that in myself about a week ago in meditation. Like, because of the physical body, a lot of what we fit does fit into the darkness side, but it's coming to terms with that and the light that shines through and how we can refine. I do like the word refinement.
Yeah, so I noticed this is an interesting, it's subtle, right? But the difference, I tend to use the word grow, and I hear from you it's more about clarify and purify,
Yes.
if I can use that. So it's a different, because and that makes sense, because there's the truth, and then there's all that separates us from that. And as a psychologist, for me, it's all our defensive structures, it's all our unresolved emotional issues, it's our misbehavior and our selfishness and our greed and all that stuff. The human stuff that I think it's a consciousness building or evolving machine that we live in this paradigm of duality, where all light casts a shadow.
And I think it's like looking into still water or looking into a stone and just getting that mud off of it so we can
Mm.
see clearly through that stone to see who we are. So it's that clearing, that refining. Like all the things that you listed are what I had called parasites. They're
Right.
fear-based false beliefs. So rather than growth, because what's already there is always there. So rather than growth, the way, and we're both, this is again presenting two directions to the same thing.
It
It's
is.
they're both true with different words. So the way I see it is it's all already there. It just has to be revealed.
So
And it gets revealed through refinement. And it's
the
in the subtle.
the word parasite, it absolutely works. I do a lot of energy clearing with people. I'm trained in shamanic practices, and it's a main part of what I do. But there's many different ways
Yes.
to understand it. And the only problem with the word parasite is that it can make it seem like it's a completely external thing that we're victimized by, as opposed to karma could also be seen as another way to understand what you're talking about, which is the accumulation of misunderstandings, energetic blips or wrinkles that we can attract to us or carry with us. And when we take responsibility for those things, then we can clear them away and get in touch with greater truth. The same thing with parasites, energetic parasites or defensive structures, which for me are exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is in taking responsibility. This is why I practice the way that I practice with shamanic tools. I don't call myself a shaman, but shamanic tools are very helpful, because in straight shamanism, you're mostly working in the feminine or the right brain realm. And I think the integration of the intellect, understanding, taking self-responsibility, understanding that nothing lives in my psychic space without my permission, even if I'm unconscious of it, really allows me to move out of being a victim into being empowered to make choices of like, oh, so I might think I'm drinking and drugging because my mother was an inept person or whatever, but really, this is my responsibility to change my behavior, to change my consciousness, to change my experience of my life. As long as
Yes.
I'm in blame and victimization, I'm disempowered.
Totally. And it's remarkable because the work I do in acupuncture now is nothing like what I used to do. This has all been revealed to me within the past 6 months to a year. Um, Yesterday, I was working on a woman who's had chronic neck pain for many, many years. Came in the first time and I worked directly on the muscles to release them, and that would be dry needling. And then I did a few other distal points that are farther away. Yesterday, I decided I did not do a single needle near her neck. I'd put, let's say, right here, I'd find a tight muscle. I'd put my hand on her shoulder. And then I would clear my mind to be open for the guidance on where to put the needle. And I'd put in the needle, and literally, we both felt it. We'd see it. Her entire shoulder would start twitching as I worked a needle in her leg. So that's using that would be the right side of the brain, so to speak, really letting that intuition and that trust working through me. And it was beautiful. Every single needle managed to connect, which is remarkable. It was a beautiful day like that. At the same time, I'm able with the other side of my being to explain to her how we're releasing long-held belief systems, how we're helping her to reintegrate into her body, how we're reconnecting with parts of her body she wasn't letting herself feel, or she was holding emotions in for however long it's been there. So that's done not as not just as filler. It's done to help the other side of the brain to accept the healing,
Right.
to create more wiggle room in the beliefs. So I think we're doing, again, the same thing with different words.
Mhm.
We're because it's that full brain integration, it's that full being integration of the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, the rational and the mysterious, that really gives it the juice that allows things to move forward using
Well,
directionality a little bit.
and the physical, and I like to say the physical and the metaphysical, which is that you're connecting with the metaphysical, with the intuition, with the wiser guidance that is non-rational, not irrational, it's non-rational, right? And you're manifesting that in the physical world. And that's the fantastic thing
Yes.
that we get to do here as humans, is that we have a physical body, there is a physical plane, there is density here that we can, and this is what creativity is about, right? That our ideas allow us to create, to bring in however we get the ideas. And this is where self-responsibility and consciousness is really important, like just straight old consciousness of being aware of, like, what am I thinking? What are my motives? Where is that coming from? You know, my kid does something wrong, I can scream at them, I can hit them, I can throw something at them, I can shut the door and ignore them, or I can sit down and have an intelligent conversation with them, or I can have compassion for them. Like, there's all these different ways. I can remember when I was a teenager and what that was like and share that with them. There's all these different ways that I can respond to any circumstance. Like with their client, like you could go to your acupuncture chart and you could like put the needle where they would tell you that you do it for a shoulder injury. There's nothing wrong with that, but you tapped into something different and had a different outcome. And we get to do that in every circumstance, in every moment of our life.
And I want you just brought me into something so fun. Again, let's do a little third rail fun here. We could go all day about free will paradox, whether or not we have it.
Mm.
I've come to a place of comfort with free will. I've come to the belief that this is a bio machine,
Mhm.
basically, with programming put into it. The free will that I find to be the most real is intent. And that's going back to
Yeah.
clearing out the noise, clearing out the false beliefs. So the intent becomes more and more clear, because you just mentioned how to react in scenarios and how we process through it.
Mhm.
And ultimately, as we set our higher intent, what comes into our mind when we're triggered starts to shift. So, in other words, the palette of options that we present ourselves with in the bio machine becomes more aligned with our intent over time.
Oh, that's
And that's
beautiful. Yeah.
it's really, and that's through the heart, that's through, this is me again talking about refinement and polishing the stone and dropping away of all that stuff. And I'll tell you why I do that over growth. Because if you look at a plant that's growing, if it has something funky on it, it's going to grow in funny directions. If it has like an injury, if it has an obstruction, it's going to grow around it. It's going to influence how it grows. But if you clean all that off, then it grows straight and true. And it doesn't have to put in the amount of work to find the sun.
So I'm going to say both are true, the clearing and the
They are.
growth. Because one of the things that I see a lot, and I work with people, and I see them as structures. And it's one of the issues, I think, with a lot of, particularly the popularity of enlightenment right now is something that people want to do. And enlightenment
Yes.
is probably the highest level that we can get to before we evaporate. here, and very few people are going to reach it. And what a lot of people want to do is they want to skip the work. They want to go from shame to enlightenment. They want to go from guilt or fear to enlightenment. Like, let's skip all that human messy stuff and let's just go right for the gold. But we really,
Yes.
like a tree, like a tree needs to be able to have strong roots. It has to have a solid trunk. It has to have strong branches to be able to bear fruit. I've had trees in San Francisco, there's sand there, and we have big windstorms, and it will blow huge trees right over because their roots aren't deep enough. Or I've seen trees snap because their trunk wasn't strong enough. So there is absolutely both things happening. There needs to be clarification, but there also needs to be strengthening of the structural internal system to be able to move and hold the next level. Now, sometimes with humans, there may be pops. Like I went from one day, literally in a bar room, in a blackout, went home with some guy, I didn't know his last name. And the next day, I went to a 12-step meeting, November 4th of 1987, and my life has been changed ever since. Completely changed.
Yes.
Boom, boom. That was it. Now, I've had many, and I've had those, not as big as that, but I've had many other things happen like that, where like all of a sudden, everything's different. But I've also had the educational variety more commonly, where there's just this continual development, the strengthening and the deepening to be able to hold and produce and really have more joy and fulfillment and happiness and peace, and less of all of the parasites. But the parasites will kill the tree. They will kill the tree. They'll stop it from growing.
And that night of hitting rock bottom, that's pulling back that slingshot really far. And then when you let it go, it shoots you straight and true, if that's your time.
And if that's your particular dynamic that happens for you, because people have different dynamics of how things happen.
And yeah, if that's your time.
I'm kind of dramatic, so I like, toss me.
I unfortunately can relate, and I've been working on shifting. I've actually shifted. My dreams are no longer the way they were. I've shifted my energy away from being as exciting as it used to be.
No, I told you beforehand. So I actually broke a couple ribs 2 weeks ago, mountain biking. I'm going to be 60 in a couple of months. And I think I'm done with mountain biking, right? Like I'll still ride on the back of a motorcycle, but yeah, I don't need to. Because I'm not that interested. I always make sure I have a parachute now before I jump. I used to just jump and hope that there was soft landing, and there wasn't always.
Yeah, so really, I think we've really we've been circling around the same type of stuff, and it's that balance. And I haven't touched this yet, but this is actually going right back in. Oh, by the way, I love your tree analogy, because a tree is not going to be very useful unless it has some wind against it to make it strengthen its branches. It needs to have those forces.
Yes.
And so what I'm doing in polishing the stone right now, I'm in a moment of cultivating stillness to be able to see deep into the pond.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about growth. And we have those moments of cultivating movement.
Yeah.
And they're both very, very important, and they're dynamically in balance. It is the dance. That's the
It's the
masculine and the feminine.
seasons. This is where nature's so, we can see winter behind you.
The cycles.
And it's so, we often it's like we want to be happy all the time. We think we should be something all the time. We should always have a certain amount of money in our bank. We should always be sunshine. And really, always sunshine makes a desert, right? There needs to be these seasonal reflections in our own ways of being. There's a time to reap and a time to sow, a time to be still and a time to move, and knowing when those are. The masculine is afraid of stillness often, because
Until the masculine learns to trust the feminine.
Yes.
And the feminine is resistant to change, and until the feminine learns to trust the masculine.
Yes. This is
They
the
both
interplay.
have their yes.
Yeah.
And that's why every shift in consciousness is the dance of masculine and feminine at a more refined level. And by refined, I do mean that word very carefully, because at the higher frequencies, in order to vibrate at higher frequencies, you have to have more highly refined machinery
Yes. Yes, absolutely. On both sides. And
on
that's the
both sides.
evolution. I mean, that's the thing that I see is, and this is a whole other conversation, is that actually the masculine has become very well developed. I ordered something on Amazon yesterday and it arrived today. Like, it's like magic. Like, whoa, I don't know how they do that, right? I order a book, they print it and they get it to me in like 12 hours. It's crazy. But from my perspective, I think that in human consciousness, the feminine is underdeveloped. And I think that this is
Yes.
where we need really, not that the masculine and feminine are dynamic energies in the universal force, but our relationship with it, how we manifest it, how we access it, is really underdeveloped. And that we
Yes.
can look at that in lots of different ways, but the most helpful is to really just look at it within ourselves. That's the most productive. I know you'll agree with that. The most productive thing we can do is to get in touch with our feelings, to make peace with presence and stillness, to make peace with mystery and trust and love and compassion and vulnerability. And when we can make peace with those, that is the wise, empowered feminine that has infinite to offer us.
What I'd like to use, so the masculine has become developed but extremely imbalanced.
Right, because it
It's
doesn't
not
have
a
a partner.
healthy it's not a healthy masculine. And it's wild when you look at it, and there's a lot in, if you look at ancient architecture and stuff like that. Something like the pyramids was built with the masculine and feminine. It's using technologies we still cannot fathom. A lot of the ancient architecture with that fine detail and that beauty, we can see the balance in the old architecture of the masculine and the feminine, of pulling upon the greater forces for the creation of these marvels and wonders, and not just a strictly functional
Right.
block. And it's absolutely, and it touches our hearts.
And that's what
So,
we're here to do, is expand our hearts or clarify them, depending on what you're doing. Chris, I know
yes.
you got to go. Always great to talk to you. And
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
beautiful. And let's do it again.